Before we start this video, a large thank you to Michael, J.O., two names I unfortunately cannot pronounce. Thank you so much for the support, guys. I really appreciate it. Sly Ninja, Mac Morris, Evo, Terrain Wax, Yan, Brian, Dempsey, Max, and Jims for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. And a massive special thank you to Samuel Harbin for their immense support of the channel this month on Patreon. It is greatly appreciated, my friend, and I hope you enjoy the video. Hello everybody, and today we're going to further expand upon our weapon item action systems. Let's open up the player combat manager now, and I'm just going to make a check right here, and we're going to say if the player is owner, then we're going to run this action, but then we're also going to send a server RPC, which will let the server know to run this action on every other connected client. So let's say player.playerNetworkManager.notify server of action animation server RPC, but let's call this of weapon action server RPC. So that's the name we're going to give to the new function that is not made yet. So let's go ahead and start making this function. I'm going to open up the player network manager. Now, if you wanted to, you could put this on the character network manager, but with the system I have made, we're only going to be using item-based actions for the player for now. Eventually, AI will have a similar system if the AI is to mimic a player character, but we're not going to get onto that right now. So let's just make a comment here for item actions. And again, I'm putting mine in the player network manager. Put yours wherever you'd like. And I'm going to make this a server RPC, and I'm going to give it the name we said before, which is notify the server of weapon action server RPC. And then we're going to have notify the server of weapon action client RPC. Remember, we have to end server RPC and client RPC with their respective name ends, or else you're going to get an error. And then lastly, we'll have the actual function, and I'm going to make this private. We'll have the actual function to play the weapon action. So private void play weapon action. Okay, so next I'm going to add in my client RPC tag here because I forgot to do it right above the notify the server of weapon action client RPC. And then inside the server RPC, I'm just going to check if we are the server, then let's run the client RPC. Because remember, only the server can run a client RPC. Now the client RPC is going to be sent to every single client, and then we're going to make it play that last function. But let's add in our variables first. So we're going to need a client ID, an action ID, and then a weapon ID. So we need an action ID. What's this for? Well, we're going to get to that very shortly. Let's pass these now. Client ID, the action ID, and the weapon ID. And let's make our client RPC require all three of these as well. And then let's make our play weapon action only require the action ID and the weapon ID. So what do we need these for? Well, we need the client ID to make sure we're not running the action again if we're the one who called the server RPC. So we do that by saying if client ID does not equal networkmanager.singleton.local client ID, then run play weapon action. So I'm going to make a comment here that I'm going to delete. We do not play the action again for the person or the character who initialized, or I guess you could say who called it, because they're already playing it locally. And if we go back to the player combat manager, you can see that. I'll show you momentarily. We're checking if we are the owner, and then we're playing this attempt to perform action ourselves locally, and then we're telling the server to play it for everybody else. So we don't need to run it again for us. That's why we're checking against the client ID who launched it against the local client ID of this character. And if it's not us, we just play the weapon action. And you know what? I'm going to change that to perform weapon-based actions so the naming conventions are the same throughout. And now we just perform it as we would normally. So we need an action ID and a weapon ID because, as you know, we can't send certain types of data over the network. So we're going to make a manager here to keep track of every action we have tied to weapons. And basically, we're just going to do the same thing that we did with the item database, where we're going to get each action based on its ID. So there's not going to be a whole lot of actions in your game. You might have like light attack, a heavy attack action, and then you have spell action. So there's only going to be maybe at most a couple dozen unless you're getting really intricate with these. So I'm going to drop my namespace as is per tradition, and I'm going to delete the start and update functionality. The first thing I'm going to do is make this a singleton because there's only ever going to need to be one of these in the game. This is how we're going to reference all of our actions via their IDs. So I'm going to make a public static world action manager. I'm going to call it instance. On awake, I'm going to say if the instance is null, then the instance equals this. Otherwise, destroy this game object because there should never be two of these in the scene. Next, I'm going to make it so we don't destroy this object on load. And let's also make a header for some weapon item actions. So then you can make an array of weapon item actions or a list, whatever you prefer. I'm going to use an array because once the length of this is set. It's never going to change. The actions in game will always be the actions in game. And I'm going to say using system.link. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And then I am going to come down here and make a start function. And we're going to do the same thing we did. I forgot to put do not destroy on load here. We're going to do the same thing we did with our item database. So let's make a start. And then let's just basically give all of these actions their own ID automatically. So we have to do that manually because you can mess that up very easily. So we're going to make a for loop, and for each weapon item action in weapon item actions, so we're just going to go through it, and we're just going to assign its ID equal to I. So I'm going to say dot length because mine is an array. So this is again just a regular for loop. Weapon item actions I dot action ID is equal to I. Now they will always go through the list in the same order that you have it. So it'll be consistent for other people who connect to you and who have the same game. Right below that, I'm going to make a public weapon item action function called get weapon item action. I'm going to require it to pass an ID, and then exactly as I did in the world item database, I'm going to say return, and we're going to call this weapon item actions dot first or default is what you want to use. And then I'm just going to say action is equal to greater than action dot action ID is equal to ID. And again, all that does is it searches the entire array for an action that matches the ID that you handed it in, and it gives it back. So now we can grab our action using a number ID, which is just a variable we can pass across the network, and we can say weapon action is equal to world action manager.instance dot get weapon item action by ID, and we pass the action ID. Then we're going to say if weapon item action does not equal null and else. Now, if it is null, we want to pass an error message. This should never be a thing. So debug.log error action is null, cannot perform or cannot be performed. This should never be null. So if you get that, then something has gone amiss. Otherwise, we're going to say weapon action dot attempt to perform action. And then we will pass the player, as in the player that owns this player network manager script, and then the world item database.instance.get weapon by ID and pass the weapon ID. And now we're good to go. So let's save that. And now we go back over to I think we still have an error here. Yeah, this should be in the player combat manager. Let's double click that. Yeah, so let's finish filling out this function. We got to pass the variables. What do we need? We need the client ID, and then we need the weapon action ID and the weapon performing the action. So to get the client ID, we need to say using unity.netcode up here on top, and then we're going to reference the network manager.singleton and reference the local client ID. So just up here, using unity.netcode. Now we can say network manager.singleton.local client ID. And next, we need the action ID, so we can say the weapon action dot action ID. And lastly, the weapon ID itself. The weapon is an item, remember, so we can say weapon performing action dot item ID. And we are good to go. Almost. We have to set up our actions as well. So let's save that. And I'm going to minimize this now, go back into my project. And if you go to the test action here, you want to drag that into your weapon item actions. It's the only action we have right now. Next, I'm going to go to my prefabs and make the world action manager a prefab. So that's always there. Okay, looking good. Now I'm going to search up my test actions for a second. So yeah, that's a normal weapon item action. So we need to make our first actual weapon item action. So I'm going to go to scripts, going to go to world or weapon actions, and I'm going to create a new C# script. I'm going to call this light attack weapon item action. Okay, let's open that up. Now, I'm going to erase the start and update functionality. I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to drop my namespace as is per tradition. I'm going to make this class derive from the weapon item action, so we can just override the attempt to perform action. Now, there are a lot of actions where you actually don't need to run them if you're not the owner. So a lot of actions are just you playing an animation, And as you know, we already play the animation via a server RPC, so you won't even need to run most of these, but we're going to get to that. The first thing you want to do in an action is check for anything that stops the action. So I'm just going to make a comment here saying check for stops. What's an example of that? Well, we have our stamina system set up right now, and we know that we can't perform a light attack if we have no stamina. So we can say if player performing action dot player network manager dot current stamina dot value is less than or equal to 0, then we simply say return. This is an example of a stop. There's no way you're going to play a light attack without any stamina, so we just return and nothing happens. What's another example? Well, you can do a few more depending on the action. It very much so does differ depending on what you're trying to do. We could say if the player is not grounded, then we don't want to perform a light attack action, so we return. This will change when we add our aerial attacks because there is an aerial light attack. But for now, we can't do anything, so we return. And those are two good examples for now. So otherwise, if we make it past all of our stops, what do we want to do? Well, the only thing we're going to make right now is a regular light attack action. In the future, we're going to have a running one, a rolling one, etc., a backstep. But right now, we just want to run the regular light attack action. Think of your regular R1. So let's just say if you make it past all these stops, you do perform your regular light attack. We pass the player performing action and the weapon performing action. What do we do from here? Well, we need to check which hand we're using, because if we're using a left hand, we're going to do something different than if we're using our right hand, depending on the item. So I'm going to say if player performing action dot, and we're going to say is using right hand. It will be referenced from the player network manager dot value, then do some logic. And then right below, we're going to say if player performing action dot player network manager dot is using left hand dot value, then run some logic. So we're only going to ever be using one of these, so we can just return after the right hand action if that's the one we're using. So what do we do here? Well, we want to play an action animation. So we say player performing action dot player animator manager. And now you could use play action animation, but we're going to have to add some more data to that. So instead, we should give it its own function. So instead of play target action animation, we should call this play target attack action animation, because a regular action doesn't have as much data. With an attack animation, we're going to need to know the attack type in the future. We're going to have to set a flag so the character is attacking. So let's just copy the entirety of the play target attack animation here, and let's just paste that right below. And we're not going to change anything in this video, really. I'm just going to delete these comments here because we don't need them there twice. And I'm going to change the name to play target attack action animation. And again, we're not going to add anything new yet, but we will immediately in the next video. But let's keep this simple for now. Let's just get this first action working. And let's get a server RPC and client RPC playing this action. So I'm going to type down here, notify the server of attack action animation server RPC. And that doesn't exist yet, but I'm just going to put that there. And I'm going to delete these comments because they already exist in the function above, just to keep this clean. And I'm going to make some new comments for what we're going to add and why. I'll explain briefly. So we have to keep track of the last attack performed. Why? Well, this is for combos. If your last attack was 1, then you play 2. If it's 2, then you play 3, etc., etc. And then we're going to keep track of current attack type. So light, heavy, etc. And why are we doing this? We got to know if the attack can be parried and how much stamina to drain and what modifiers to place in the damage of our damage glider. And lastly, we update the animation set to the current weapons animations. I'm also going to make a comment here for just to decide if we can be parried, because I mentioned that before, and I'll put it here so it's clear. So what does that mean? Well, every item is going to have its own animation set. So we're always going to play Light Attack 01 for Light Attack 01, but that animation will change depending on the animator's override controller. So a straight sword has a different animator controller than a mace, for example. But don't worry about that, we'll get to that. It's very simple to set up. And then we're going to tell the network we are in an attacking flag. This is so we can apply things like counter damage. So if you hit someone while the attack flag is active, you do a little bit more damage for a lot of weapon types. So this is just a handful of examples of different data that we'll need for play target attack action animation versus play target action animation. So it's good to keep them separate. All right, now let's go to the character network manager. Let's open that up, and I'm just going to minimize this here and see what's going on. So yeah, we can copy the entirety of this notify the server of action animation server RPC, paste it again, and just replace everything. Just put the word attack in front of action. And again, on this video, we're not changing anything here. But in the next video, we're going to set our attack's damage based on the damage modifier of light or heavy. and we're going to drain stamina and do a bunch of other cool things. So we will actually modify these in the next video. But for now, let's have them there, set up and ready to go. So once you got that done, save it, good to go. And I encourage you to go try this stuff on your own after this video, because if you think you got a good idea where I'm going, go for it, try it out. Now on the play target action animation, we require a target animation, and we require to know if we are performing an action. So let's just make a serializable field on this scriptable object. It's going to be a scriptable object when we make it in our project. I'm going to call this light_attack_01. And I'm going to initialize this at main_attack, or _light attack, sorry, _01. What does main mean? Well, main as in our main hand, so our right hand. So we're going to have offhand and main hand, or if you want to use right hand and left hand, that's cool too. You can make a comment here so it's not confusing if you'd like. I'm going to delete it though, because to me that's very, very clear of what this is. So then I'm going to pass the light attack 01 right here. And then I'm going to say true for is performing action. Now if this was a left-handed attack, we'd play an off-handed attack animation, but let's not get to that right now. Let's just set up this one to make sure it works, one thing at a time. Now over here, I'm going to copy the create asset menu from weapon item action, just paste it up here so I can just change the name of it. And I'm going to call this light attack action. And then I'm going to save that. And now we can create this in our project as a scriptable object. So how are we going to do this? Let's go to our data, then our weapon actions, right click, create, character actions, weapon actions, light attack action. Now I'm going to drag this on the straight sword and replace it, because right now I believe there's just the regular test action. And I'm going to add it to my world action manager. That's very important, so it gets its own unique ID. And now I'm going to go over to the straight sword. There it is, and drag in this action. So we don't have an animation set up yet, so let's do that next. Again, I'm using the straight sword animation set, which you can find on our asset store page. You can get a bunch of animations for free, though, using things like Mixamo, so just use whatever you got, whatever you want to use. I'm going to put in the light attack 01 animation, because that is the animation that I'm going to use here. So I'm going to drag that in here like so. I'm going to call this main_light_attack_01. And this animation state will always be here, but the animation inside of this little box will change depending on the weapon we're holding in the future. But main light attack 01 will always be there. Gonna make my exit time 0.9, transition about 0.15. We'll see. You might want to play around these values, depends on what you're going for, but this to me looks really nice. All right, so I'm gonna go back into my project here now, light attack weapon action, and right here we got play target attack animation. Let's go to that. So you can see here that basically we're running a server RPC, so we only ever want to run this if we're the owner, because you only want to run this server RPC if you're the owner of the person trying to call this animation. So for that reason, we're going to check if we are an owner before running this logic. Now you could go to the light attack action and just right here under perform light attack, you could just say if we're not the owner, return. But like I said before, some actions you don't want to do anything if you're not the owner, and some you'll want to do some stuff, and some you might even want to do everything. But for this action in particular, there's nothing here that needs to be ran if you're not the owner, because we don't need to check the stamina if we're not the owner, because that's only there to see if we play the light attack. So I'm going to come right back up here and say if we're not the owner, then just return. And if you want to make sure the action is actually still running though on a server RPC, what you can do is put that after the base attempt perform action. So we can say if we're not the owner, return. We'll still know if the server RPC fired correctly, because we'll get a debug message on our end when someone else tries to perform an action. So we go into the game, I'm on another client, as you can see, I swing this sword, I should play the animation, and boom, the action has fired. I get a debug message on the other end notifying me that, yep, we did run that client RPC, and we did run that function on their game object on our end locally. Now if I drag this window over here, and I'll go on the client end, and I'm going to perform an attack real quick, and you'll see that on the host end, I'm going to perform an attack, and yes, it does also work on the client end. So that is working as intended. Now, I wanted to set up this server RPC system for actions, because for a lot of actions, you're not actually going to need it, because all they will be syncing, or all you're going to need to sync, is an attack animation, which we've already done. But there are special instances where you want to have some other logic be ran too, aside from the animation. So that's why I made those into a server RPC as well. And it's just nice to know how to do it. So what's next? Well, we're going to make it so we open our damage colliders during these attack animations in the next episode. And we're going to make it so we drain stamina and set damage based on the attack type. Now, right now, there's only one attack type, so we're going to set the damage based on the light attack modifier, which is the modifier we're going to make. And in the future, the damage of the weapon will change depending on if it's a light attack or a heavy attack or a running attack, etc., etc. But yeah, in the next episode, the goal is to actually swing that sword, and you're going to be able to hit the other character, deal some damage, drain some stamina, and then you'll have a fully functioning attack. Alright guys, I'm very excited. I will see you next week. I hope you all have a lovely weekend. Thanks for watching.